Good morning, everybody. Welcome on board for this presentation today. I'm very excited to host Gavin. He's got vast experience in local government, but then also some international experience. So before I introduce him, I'm just going to take you through what the Civil Coffee Clutch is and what we do. It's a learning network. So the idea is to offer what we do free of charge. So anybody that's interested can attend. We address smart cities, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and I was asked to add technology or ICT audits into this. Now, we have on our first quarter of this year, which for me ends next month, not this month, we are addressing cybersecurity. In the next quarter, we will look at technology audits. After that, artificial intelligence, and then we're going to do a few sessions on strategic management. So the purpose of us getting together is to learn from one another, to improve local government service delivery and optimize operations and strengthen citizen trust and also our trust in ourselves. The journey that we are on is to move local government from turmoil into service excellence. And it's purely from learning from each other and applying what we learn. My slide, you will see it, those of you who know my slide, it got a little rider on it now. Imagine the future. This is about not accepting things as they are. If we accept things as they are, we are managing and we are fighting fires. If we set a strategy and we determine that strategy and we work towards the strategy, then the firefighting becomes less. We do better time management, we do better personal management. And as we set that strategy, we can also determine our journey and how we get to that strategic point, which reflects on remembering the future. I'm going to introduce Gavin. He is the IT manager or the manager ICT, Bitou municipalities. He drives organizational technology strategy, information security, compliance, and operational excellence. Gavin is a brilliant presenter. He's an accomplished ICT leader with over 20 years of international experience across South Africa and the United Kingdom. He specializes in cybersecurity, IT governance, digital transformation, and you can include digital evolution into that, risk management, and strategic technology leadership. He's the current ICT manager at Bitou Municipality. He drives organizational technology strategy, information security, compliance, and operational excellence. Gavin, welcome on board. I'm handing over the floor to you.
Thank you very much, David. It's difficult to make a ginger blush, but you have. I don't know if you can see it I've kept the lights off, so it might not be visible, but you've made me blush when you said I'm a brilliant presenter. The other things I might debate a little bit here and there, but it is interesting to hear someone talk about you directly. I suppose it gives yourself some context. But thank you, David, for this opportunity. It is really going to be a pleasure for me to present. It's something I love doing. I love talking about the technology. It is one of my absolute favorite things in this world. And the journey towards being someone who is involved in governance has been also quite a pleasure, being a technical person at heart. One of the things, if you'd give me a moment, David, I like to do is, I mean, you've given my background. I would like to give it a bit more in detail because I think it's important sometimes to understand the credibility of an individual. I feel it's important. So I started my journey in my 20s. I was offered a job in the United Kingdom after doing some small studies in South Africa. I was offered a consultant's position in the UK. I was consulting mainly with CRM and site infrastructure, sort of Active Directory, DNS, mail service exchange, hosting, a bunch of things. That lasted for about 5 years, and I moved on to another company in South London, where I was a fourth-line enterprise engineer. We looked after everything across 300 sites, spanning the whole of the United Kingdom and later into Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and those regions. We looked after something in the region of 150 servers at that time, multiple terabytes of data. It was quite big infrastructure. It's quite nice to go from small infrastructure to a massive infrastructure. Learned a lot in that time. At some point in the 2012, I was offered an opportunity to move to South Africa and work for what was Dimension Data at that time, and I took a chance. My company gave me a sabbatical. I moved back to South Africa, and the rest is history. And I've been at Bitou ever since. I transitioned from private sector to public sector at some point during that journey, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And it's taught me a lot. Public sector has really taught me a lot, and I've enjoyed the journey. It's been really exciting. So that's me in a nutshell. I hope I can bring credibility to my presentation and provide some knowledge and sharing. Thank you, David. So, David, would you like me to jump straight into the presentation, or would you like to have some further interactions up front?
Gavin, I think you can go directly into the presentation, please.
Perfect. If you could just give me an indication that you can see my presentation. Before we begin, David, you know my style is one of, I like interaction, so I'm quite happy if at the end of each slide, if anyone really feels the need to elaborate on something, that we can elaborate if you feel fit. I presume you're holding control of the mic. Perhaps we can play it by ear how you'd like to do it. So I'll begin for the moment, because I'd like to try and make it as interactive as possible. I know questions are often not always forthcoming in these sessions, but I'd like to try and get guys to challenge me a little bit and challenge some of the decisions and some of the things that we did. I'd like just to elaborate at this point that what's important to understand is that this is our journey. This was the journey we embarked on, and I can guarantee you we would do it differently, not materially differently, but the journey would probably be a little bit more different, because you learn a lot along the way. And while you learn this along the way, when I reflect back, and this was a great insight, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking this far back and trying to recollect my thoughts in terms of what we did, why we did it, what was the thinking, what were the constraints. And it's a very interesting introspection to determine how we got here. And I wish in some instances I could go back and make some very small changes, and I'm sure the impacts would have been quite extensive. So as David indicated, I'm the IT manager at the Bitou Municipality, and this is our cybersecurity journey. Good morning, Johan. So the first slide is one of the things I feel quite passionate about. On one hand, we have governance, and the other hand, we have practical initiatives. That tug of war is something that you as an individual and your organization are going to need to come to terms with. Your maturity is really going to determine to a great extent which one you're going to focus on. In our journey, the practical security was very obviously, as you'll see in the slides, a critical inception point, meaning I realized governance was missing, and there was some governance, but it was governance of the time. Let me say it like that. It wasn't rudimentary, is what the word I initially wanted to indicate, but that's not fair on the individuals of that time. It was the governance of the time. You'll also see me refer to as security initially halfway through my slides, because in those days, cybersecurity really wasn't a buzzword as it is today. So you'll see in my slides, the practical security was essential, because the gains we could make immediately were existential. It was going to change a lot of things for us, but to wait for the governance to come into play was going to mean that we might not be as secure as we could be, and time was against us. So relax, have a coffee. I brought mine, and my staff bought me this for my birthday. So they know I like Formula One, but more importantly, they also realize that I'm the boss, which was nice. It was interesting for them to refer to me as the boss, because it's not something that I like to advocate within the environment. I like us to be interactive as individuals so we can challenge one another. Furthermore, so this presentation outlines the cybersecurity journey of the Bitou municipality, highlighting the challenges faced along the way, the strategic decisions taken, and the lessons learned throughout the transformation. The municipality faced a combination of inherent issues, from a lack of backups and disaster recovery structures to aging systems and inadequate governance. So I mentioned the governance earlier. The governance was the governance of the time. So it happened to be inadequate because it had aged badly. Disaster recovery was clearly not a priority at that time. And again, one might look at it and say the staff of the time did not do what they should have done, and you could use a bunch of words that would be defamatory. But I believe it was more about the changing of ages. I was blessed to have seen what a first-class, first-world infrastructure looked like. So it was very easy for me to determine what needed to change in the short and medium and long term. So when arriving at Bitou, the environment initially appeared to be a clean slate, although further inspection revealed significant deterioration and concerning configurations that required remediation. I took this a lot to skills gaps. So there was a lot of skills gaps and a lot of lessons I learned at the early times during my inception to Bitou. At that time, I was the operations manager and service delivery manager, working still for Dimension Data. And it became clear that there was a skills gap of the staff that were managing the infrastructure, and they were doing the best they could with the skills they had. That lesson still lives with me today. And it was important for me to realize this when I built these slide decks, and when I looked back to realize that theme still exists today. And that was something I didn't realize I'd learned at that time, but I clearly did. So we had critical gaps, including the absence of backups and disaster recovery. Well, the backups perhaps weren't absent, more broken than absent, but there was a semblance of backups, but the emphasis didn't seem to be emphasized on the backups. It seemed like operational day-to-day took the focus, and the strategic element of the infrastructure wasn't being cared for as much as it probably should. So we quickly moved to trying to change this environment by trying to identify the key elements that we needed to resolve. And addressing these deficiencies was the first operational priority, ensuring that the IT environment had a minimum survivability in the event of incident. And I really mean that. It had minimal survivability in the early days, and that really was our goal. Our goal was just to make sure, like, can we recover from logical things that could happen that are practical, things like power outages, internet outages, data loss. We didn't focus initially on what if we lost our entire infrastructure? What if we got hacked? What if we got ransomware? We looked at things that were practical, achievable, rather than things that were impractical and that would cost money that we didn't have at the time. You'll see my other theme that I'll have in a lot of my slides that I do is I will indicate always that we need to exploit what we have, use the things we have to the greatest ability that we can. That almost always is going to be the best way to leverage the value from your infrastructure. So further, we went to move to establish an ITSM platform. So I'm sure you guys all know and gals know what the ITSM means to an organization, and this is a journey we're still on. This journey doesn't end. The platform helped us create visibility into work streams, while SLAs, we enabled SLAs and the measurement of the performance of our teams and their interactions. What that meant practically is we started being able to understand what we were doing reactively and what we needed to do proactively. So we used the ITIL concept of problem management to bring problems to the fore, so we could control and manage the the initiatives that we were putting in place, whether they were security, whether they were just improving the infrastructure or improving the reliability or the performance of the infrastructure. The early stabilization phase set the groundwork for a longer security improvement and governance alignment. So some of these issues, we had no control over the backhaul Wi-Fi. So we got here and we realized, geez, there's a Wi-Fi infrastructure. It actually was 3 of them, to be honest. We had to consolidate them down to 1, gain control of them, determine what the security posture was, what was going on the network, who had access, a variety of things. It was an exercise in itself, and we took it in phases. We'd focus on it for a few months and we'd move to the next, and so on and so forth. Things like we found broadcasting SSIDs with web encryption, which was crazy even back then. I indicated the lack of DR, the lack of backups at that time. And alerting was a big one. You'll see it along this journey, where we realized that if we didn't have visibility of our infrastructure, it was very hard to determine what we were trying to protect. I mean, that's one of the very basic concepts of NIST is identify your assets and protect your assets. So the ITSM really formed the backbone of us being able to manage what we were doing, how we were doing it, and whether we were doing it within the prescribed SLAs that we put forward. Governance and risks. So governance became a major driver as security risks surfaced across multiple audits, including AG, internal audit, and risk management process. Notwithstanding, at around this time, the Western Cape government became very active in leveraging and bringing governance down to the municipalities and the subsequent policies. So this was a real inception point, because at this stage, we started to realize that we were stuck between what you saw on the first slide, the practicalities of, do I just keep implementing security controls, or do I focus on the governance and compliance? Which means you can sometimes get distracted, meaning that you're not securing the environment because you're staring at your documents for too long. So we had to split the activity and make sure we focused more or less equally across those 2 planes. So leveraging these assessments, the predetermined, the AG outcomes, the internal audit outcomes, and our risk assessments, we started motivating towards the leadership to approve funding for necessary infrastructure, such as the long-awaited disaster recovery site. So we used these tools. So I used audit, I used risk to motivate for money. In my personal opinion, it's a very practical way to inform your leadership exactly of what is required in terms of finance. So I'm not saying anyone does this. I'm saying that ICT people are generally quite proud. So we never want to seem to be failing, but sometimes failure is the journey to success, because if we aren't exposing the things that we need to change that requires funding, we will probably always be chasing our tails. So on the other hand, we focused on urgent technical controls. This is the right-hand side that I spoke about, the practical security controls, understanding how governance policies influence operational behavior. This shift helped transition the municipality from ad hoc security responses towards a structured compliance-based decision-making, even if it was subliminal. Now, I mean the subliminal part where we brought a lot of this information to our senior management, and we started to see that we got support in terms of restructuring our organogram, providing budgets for us to be able to implement security controls. And this changed the game significantly for us. So we further went on to categorize the risks clearly and articulating their potential impact. Stakeholders became increasingly aware of how governance shaped municipal resilience. This phase also catalyzed the improvements in documentation, standards, and alignment of ICT practices with a broader organizational policies. So we became an enabler. Even if we weren't being acknowledged as an enabler, we were starting to at least practically build the building blocks to become an enabler when the time was right. It also started to build trust, which I believe, in my opinion, brought investment into ICT. So once we'd garnered a lot of this information, we needed to build security as a foundation. So the initial security capabilities were established by first reviewing the licensing and functionality of existing security appliances. It speaks again to the passion I have for use what you've got before you go out and buy something else. If you do not understand what you have and how to exploit it to the fullest, it makes no practical sense to go out and buy something new, because you're going to have the same constraint there. This analysis revealed the need for a centralized logging appliance to consolidate telemetry for multiple systems. So at this point, the team also reviewed the edge firewalls and endpoint firewalls, and they started to implement security event management. Now, it's not a SIEM, it's a SEM. Unfortunately, at the time, money was not available to us. And funny, we still use the SEM. We never actually moved away from it because we did feel it was sufficient for our needs. And we had other tools who could offer the incident side of the SEM topic. So we implemented a tool called SolarWinds, and we also implemented at that time a 40 analyzer, with I think a lot of municipalities use across the region, and it was used to start to create that single pane of glass where we could look at a single pane of glass to determine what vulnerabilities did we see overnight and how should we triage them in the morning. And I'll get to that momentarily. So SolarWinds Orion became a central asset management platform, providing real-time. So let me perhaps explain that a bit more. We realized we needed to centralize our logging. A lot of people might use other tools like Manage Engine, Splunk, but we settled on SEM, SolarWinds SEM, Security Event Manager. And we also moved to one of their other products. And you'll see this theme. I generally try and stay within a certain product because the knowledge is easy to transfer between the products. We also started to use a SolarWinds Orion product, which became the way that we were able to visualize our entire infrastructure in one pane of glass. And we were able to monitor it and manage it to determine what was up, what was down, what might be being impacted by changes, or if someone is looking, perhaps if a threat actor had got hold of the network, which luckily never happened, we would see nodes going up and down and the events being created. So SolarWinds Orion, one of the really key things that we realized really early on is that once we identified our assets and we placed them into a visual space, we were able to provide priorities onto them. So what we did was we'd look at the whole asset infrastructure and determine which asset infrastructure components needed to be priority ones. And those had a great impact on how we manage the infrastructure going forward. So I'll give you some examples. So any edge switches, any critical high site links that connected, any critical links like backups that were maybe traversing those links, or firewalls, edge firewalls, we would mark them as P1s. What that would do is give us two very critical things. Is as soon as they went down, a call would be logged into our ITSM, and if it was out of hours, our out of hours engineer would be notified so they could investigate and not wait till the morning to have a look at a critical infrastructure component that might be either failing of its own accord, or it might be being impacted by a potential threat actor that made their way into the environment. So it really helped us garner a good control over what was happening within the environment. So this consolidated approach significantly strengthened detection capability while also enabling our proactive incident response. With these basic tools in place, the municipality gained the ability to interpret events more effectively and build operational awareness that previously did not exist. Establishing these foundations was crucial before deeper hardening efforts could begin. And this is critical. Once we knew what we had, it was much simpler to start to target those P1 assets and say, right, we need to focus on these assets and we need to harden those assets with the tools that we have. The proactive response being key to this whole topic, because we wanted to, one of the beauties of these tools, and there's many of them, Orion is just one, and I've used many and they're all quite good, was that from certain metrics of CPU, memory, disk space, we'd get proactive reports of what and when something is likely to fail. In other words, it could tell us that CPU might get to this point in 2 years' time, memory consumption is growing, or disk consumption is growing, and we could proactively then go look and determine why these incidents were occurring. We also started to move on to daily focus areas, what I call stand-ups. It's kind of in the agile methodology. space. So as an example, and this was probably midway through our journey. So what we would do, and we currently still do, Monday mornings, we would always have a weekly priorities list. So my staff would stand up in a meeting and discuss what are their weekly priorities, and they would have to include things like, and you'll see like later in the week where we had other initiatives. So they'd have to talk about their priorities for that week and how they were going to address them. Tuesdays is our change control day, and this was really important. And you'll see the governance at this point wasn't truly implemented, but we knew change control needed to happen, so we didn't wait for the governance. We implemented a change cab meeting on a Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, whereby we could discuss changes we wanted to implement into the environment, and that we could create a space that was trusted. So the environment would only go up and down on set days. Our Thursdays was our change day, so it was all about creating a reliable perception to the workforce. So I did miss on Mondays, we have a second meeting which starts at 11 and runs till 1 o'clock, which is our security meeting. I think I'll mention it a little bit later on, but it was a really important meeting that established a lot of controls within the environment. Wednesdays became a procurement day. We would discuss procurement and licensing, but boring, but it was an important inception point during the week. Thursdays, we would have call escalations. So we would take our ITSM data, we would pool it, we'd look at calls that are aged, calls that have high priorities, and we would discuss them and place priorities on them. This would then feed back into the Monday meeting, which would mean that those would form part of the engineers and the technicians' Monday priorities. This was key because it allowed us to manage our workload and put priorities on work without people just doing work, without really considering the greater achievements of what we were trying to achieve. And this did tie into the cybersecurity, it did tie into security of the time. Finally, on Fridays, we would look back and say, okay, how did change control go? How did our procurement go? Were there any issues around procurement? Were there any issues around call management? And are there any security issues that were lingering during the week that perhaps we got to the end of the week that we didn't resolve? And then we would be able to at least emphasize them then on the Friday or on the Monday. So we came to the fun part. This is really where the job became fun. We started hardening the environment. So after the essential controls were in place, the municipality embarked on a structural hardening process, targeting endpoints, networks, administrative practices. Using the asset database from Orion, the team assessed system posture, identified vulnerable areas, and developed corrective actions. So at this stage, we started to play around with network segmentation between different networks, and we pretty much implemented the zero trust principles. So I can at this stage say that there are a lot of things to consider when you're implementing a network segregation, and the most important thing, one of the things I'm always looking at, is port trunking. Not enough can ever be said about network port trunking. It is one of the most important things you can look at, because it can summarily break down all of the infrastructure you've put in place to be secure and segmented. If you're just tagging or untagging, or I should say untagging, not tagging, untagging the wrong VLANs into the wrong ports, you could inadvertently expose secure network segments to external threat actors, or internal threat actors for that matter. So a major milestone was a transition to a full layered 3 segmented network, drastically limiting the lateral movement and potential. And I can't emphasize this enough. It's often about defense in depth, meaning you're just creating layers of defensible infrastructure that you can monitor. And there's no point building it, in my opinion, if you're not going to monitor it, because if a threat actor is moving laterally through your environment and they find themselves in one of your layers and you're not alerting, you might find yourself wanting. And that's really one of the most important things that we implemented was, and it's a continuous improvement of implementing monitoring and alerting along the journey. I do have a slide on the business rules as we implemented them. I'll bring that up I think it's the next slide. So furthermore, we implemented strict controlled internet access that remained consistent both on and off the network. So what I mean by that is whether you were on Fabric or off Fabric, you were always subject to municipal policy, firewall policy, meaning that you were never in the wild, you were always being protected, no matter where you were. It was really groundbreaking, and as we all know, the people is always the security issue. It probably constitutes more than 80% of your security vulnerability landscape. So it really introduced a great form of control. Further, we moved to USB access control. It was monitored and restricted, and mandatory cybersecurity awareness training was enforced. So the USB control was essential. We had now controlled the access to the internet, and then we took control of the ingestion of data through USB ports. This was groundbreaking because it was a shift for the organization, and it was a shift for us in terms of how we were going to control devices. And people were upset initially, but we found that it certainly stabilized our environment and found much fewer vulnerable notifications from our endpoints. The awareness training was also groundbreaking. In a nutshell, we introduced, and I hate saying it this way, but penalties whereby if you didn't meet a certain requirement, we would disarm your internet, but we would allow you access to business rules, which I'll show you in the next example. So, and that was if people were repeatedly failed compliance for cybersecurity awareness training. We would help them, mind you. We would not leave them on their own. We would actually set up schedules where we'd go through the videos with them, explain them, and just out of interest, we used Mimecast's awareness training, which is very good. There's many others, but Mimecast has been our tool of choice for a while and has worked very well for us. So during this period of strengthening our security measures, it represented a significant cultural shift, embedding security practices into everyday operation. You can see that we've managed the internet, we've managed the USB port ingress, and we've started to train people to how to better be culturally aware of the issues within the environment. Little things like we disabled RDP, we created third-party segmentation, we implemented PKI, and we enforced the training. Here's just a small example of one of our firewall rules. I'm not sure if it's presenting very well, but just in a nutshell, what you find here is we have interface pairs. This is the segregation of interfaces and protecting of networks, the network segmentation. You'll see the principle has remained, and this is a constant. You'll actually hear me talking about this at various presentations I do, where you build business rules to protect the environment. Often I'm asked, how long does it take? And the answer I give, I haven't given up until now, but on introspection, I always want to give is it takes forever. It never ends. This is something you're going to do forever. So this is a good example of how we construct our business rules prior to ZTNA. So we're moving to ZTNA slowly. So we build a user group. In this case, the user group is password manager. So only if you knew that group can you access that resource internally, and only if you're coming from those source VLANs can you access the resource internally. So it's kind of a dual factor in some senses of authentication, because once you arrive at password manager, you're going to need to use your admin credentials to get in. But in order to get to the resource, you're going to need to use your normal account to get to the resource through the firewall. It then constrains the destination, which in this case is our 10.04.147, which is in our subnet 54 as we know it. And further, it constrains the ports that you can gain access to that resource to. And then we use the traditional firewall and network options and the security policies, which are crafted and reviewed on our Monday security meetings. And lastly, and more importantly, we log the sessions over here, and we label it with a comment that is giving us an idea of what we've built. I could harp a lot more on that screenshot, but that's unfortunately, I don't think time's going to permit. So then we move on to people and process. This is one of the more difficult. The tech's easy, the people are a little bit more difficult. And I guess we all know this, but in this journey, I was blessed that I had excellent staff and still do, and they supported me entirely along the journey, and we actually went there together rather than they followed Gavin. We walked the road together. So the security maturity accelerated once cybersecurity was recognized as a shared municipal responsibility rather than a domain of a single ICT function. Job descriptions were updated and embedded in security and disaster recovery. So we embedded security and disaster recovery within the job descriptions. And it was expected of everyone to participate in security. It wasn't Gavin's responsibility. It wasn't the network manager's responsibility. It was everyone's responsibility. The ISG section was right-sized with clear delineation of roles, resolving long-standing accountability issues. So a dedicated security committee, which I indicated on the Mondays, was established, and the meetings had weekly reviews and critical areas, including firewalls, EMS, Wi-Fi, Active Directory. Literally anything security related was on the table to be discussed. We didn't constrain ourselves to one thing or another. What we established to put out was I made sure that 2 staff members formed the sole responsibility and oversight of the firewall with external escalation paths. So we had a 4th line of support if we ran out of talent internally. This drove continual improvement. Using this people-centric focus fostered a continuous improvement and ensured that the operational practice aligned with the ever-evolving threat landscape. It's everyone gets read access to our firewalls. Everyone gets read access to our analyzers. Everyone gets read access to our security SIEM appliance, so that everyone has visibility, so that it's not an us and them scenario. This is essentially how the people structure broke itself out. We broke ourselves into pillars, and we gave responsibility to each of those pillars. You will see, perhaps in some of my other presentations, I will talk a lot about right-sizing the organization. And again, I think we are about to evolve one more time if we're given the opportunity to, whereby we can start to build pillars of skills, pillars of resources, and teams that are responsible for key elements within the environment. So daily operations and monitoring became critical. So daily cybersecurity operations, and we started to call it cybersecurity at this point, were strengthened through the creation of what I call a mini SOC. It's a model focused on key entry points. It's not real time because we couldn't afford real time, and it was just beyond our means at this point. What it meant was a routine review of firewalls and 40 logs enabled early detection of indications of compromise, policy-led violations by third-party, virus detections from endpoint tools, and administrative changes on critical devices. So what this meant was we would spend the first hour of our day, 45 minutes a day, doing 2 things: morning checks, daily, weekly, monthlies, as we'll call them in the next slide, and doing security checks. So I would have my own security checks. My system engineer who looks after my applications would have their security checks, and my ITSM leader who looks after the ITSM system would have his checks, and my network infrastructure guys would have their checks, and collectively we would build a collection of issues that we would uncover using the tools that I indicated earlier to log calls to deal with during the week or deal with as a matter of priority. This also extended to my desktop teams, by the way, as well. And this is what I mean by baking security into everybody's job. So tracking admin behavior became an essential safeguard against accidental misconfigurations or deliberate misuse. Not that we had any, but this was something that SolarWinds really created for us to create visibility of who's changing what and why. So these daily operation checks offered an early warning capability that significantly elevated our situational awareness. The structured routines also helped maintain ongoing compliance and governance expectations by ensuring that non-conformities were quickly identified, documented, and remediated. Over time, these operations contributed to a measured improvement in the municipal reliance and forms part of my staff's KPAs and KPIs. So we've used it in that space to measure what we do and how we're improving. So policy implementation. So we're probably in 2000s now, roughly, where once the operational maturity had increased, the teams revisited existing policies to determine the practical risks, alignment, and enforceability. Each requirement was graded and reviewed, and where implementation wasn't feasible, we would log risks on our risk register. Policies were also started to get aligned to control and strengthen, for example, administrative access to firewalls. We would limit who had access and from where you could access our firewalls using AD groups and strict password controls as they were laid out in our policies. So things like remote administration was confined to secure policy protocols such as LDAP, SSH, HTTPS, to make sure that we were using the best standards of the day. It's very common for us to not look at our current standards and realize how outdated they are. We need to check them on a regular basis. So this continuous assessment will ensure that the policy compliance continuously is fed back into operations routinely to creating a loop that improves governance alignment over time. So I'd like to show you this quickly. Maybe I'll show you this at the end because I realize I'm moving a little bit slowly, but I'd like to show you at the end, perhaps I'll find that if I have time, there's 2 more slides after this. I'll show you the policy implementation on how we just visualized it and how we visualized our daily, weekly, monthlies. So vulnerability management, it probably started to appear in 2022, 2021, more or less. As the maturity progressed, vulnerability management became an institutional monthly activity. Scans were conducted internally using non-authorized techniques, as well as authenticated scans through IPsec tunnels that bypassed perimeter firewalls to assess server posture. So just to give you an idea of what this looked like practically, you scan from the outside through the firewall, from an untrusted network as a threat actor would see it, and then you would scan inside that subnet to determine what the exposure is once a threat actor perhaps makes their way into that subnet, and we would do that from various aspects. So it got quite tricky to try and build mechanisms to bring the Nessus scanner into those various spaces, and then do unauthenticated scans and then authenticated scans to replicate what it looks like when a threat actor gets credentials. So read-only credentials were used for this to access system configurations from an attacker's perspective, specifically scans such as Nessus compliance assessments for firewalls. So we could see what the compliance issues might be on the firewall, which you can't holistically look at as a single object. So this helped us break down what we needed to do on the firewall to harden it. It identified configuration weaknesses, public interfaces that underwent routine external scanning to ensure perimeter integrity. So we would scan the external interfaces to see what was exposed and how could we best harden those interfaces. So further, what we do, we use the ITSM system where our findings were logged through the ITSM system as trackable tickets and assigned to the appropriate technician or engineer. This disciplined approach turned vulnerability management into a sustainable operation and functions that aligned with the broader governance and compliance activities. And this is more or less where we are today. So today, with the environment now stabilized and the governance embedded, the municipality progressed into a more advanced security controls, segregating high-risk assets into a controlled DMZ structure to reduce systematic exposure. Now, this is an ongoing, and I will add that DMZs are great, but as for reasons I explained earlier about using port groups, and using untagging your VLANs within port groups can actually lower your security posture if you're not reviewing it regularly. So be practical and careful how you implement it, and make sure that you have the ability to review it regularly. So we moved to, I'm not sure, we can maybe have this discussion, I guess, if anyone's got questions, but we implemented PAM, Password Manager. It's been groundbreaking for us. It was deployed to centralize privileged access and reduce password sprawl and improve accountability. The centralized password practices further strengthened our operational discipline. The advanced measures represented the municipality's transition from a foundational security towards proactive threat management, putting in a more resilient long-term path. So Password Manager, what did it provide for us? Firstly, it allowed us to place our admin passwords in a secure space that was securely controlled and governed. That rule you saw earlier for the firewalls, that is the access to PAM. So it is very well protected, and it is moving its way into its own dedicated DMZ in our next architecture review. So there are initiatives to protect it even more than we do now, but it also created you would have heard me mention before, we stopped RDP. What we said was you could only RDP from the PAM interface. The PAM interface has a list of all our resources, and it allows controlled access to those resources through RDP, and only RDP is allowed only from our password manager server. It also controls our passwords. In other words, our domain admin passwords is in PAM, and PAM controls that password. So I can give the password to an engineer without exposing the actual password itself. I can just expose the access to the resource without exposing the password, and we can control the resetting and the access to the password. So we can see who used it, and we can see when last it was changed, and we can protect it from threat actors. There's a lot to be said about PAM, but in a nutshell, that's some of its key and critical sort of benefits that we've been using it for. It's probably 30% implemented. We have a long way to go with PAM, and it's why we're not looking any further than PAM right now, because we haven't completed that setup. I would say lastly, but it's not lastly, but it's lastly for this presentation, is endpoint detection. So it's not quite endpoint detection, but it operates in a very similar guise. We realized we needed to protect the endpoints a bit more, and within staying within our ecosystem, we went with an EDR product within our ecosystem, which is EMS, and enhanced the real-time protection, behavioral analysis, and automated remedial capacities. It just gives us visibility into what's happening at the endpoint and gives us control whether they're on Fabric or off Fabric, and makes the policies and remote access consistent, irrespective of whether you're on the Fabric or you're off the Fabric. It just helps with understanding what's happening on the endpoint. Plus, it does a lot of cool things, like it does sandboxing of documents that are opened. It gets them analyzed by an external, and it didn't break the bank. And it really has helped us. It doesn't matter whether you're so fast to do it. The product is irrelevant. Pick something within your skill set, skill base, and your budget, and make sure you use it to its greatest ability before you decide to move to the next sort of enjoyable tech treat, as I want to put it. Lastly, future plans. We look to expand our SOC, to use a little bit more AI, our mini SOC, as I should put it, to use AI to allow us to be watching while we're not watching, if that makes sense. We are constantly moving our GRC maturity further ahead. Once we try not to go too far ahead before we finish what we looked at. Greater identity-based controls and continuous monitoring. IAM is essential. Role-based access control is essential. And we're trying to focus a little bit more on access to our applications and being able to monitor and do continuous improvement. I cannot emphasize more that our journey has been, about continuous improvement along the journey. Rather than giant leaps, we made continuous improvements, always looked back and said, what can we improve and how? And where did it lead us? Well, it led us wherever our hearts desired, and what our hearts desired was to have fun. And something I like to encourage in my teams is enjoy the job. And if you enjoy the job, you're probably going to find a lot of satisfaction in it. If David will just give me a moment, I'd like to just perhaps break my presentation for a moment and show you some of the governance and compliance shaping that we implemented. Let me just share. I am going to share my desktop momentarily. I'm pretty sure there's nothing on there that you shouldn't see. So what practically it looked like for us, if you can all see my presentation, this was compliance based. So we made lists. We looked at our policies and we started making compliance lists. So security scans, audit event log reviews. These are monthly reviews. We conduct these monthly and have them reviewed and signed off monthly. In some instances, we'll take them to our security committees. We also started to build firewall reviews, and these are quarterly. We looked at our UPS generators, access control, aircon, and we would have yearly and quarterly reviews where we would have a responsible agent, and that responsible agent would bring it to either our security committee or bring it for signing. And it goes on. If you actually look, you'll see that we broke our policies into actionable items, where we brought them into a compliance framework that we could start to manage, and we would start to implement slowly in that incremental fashion. Similarly, with our daily, weekly, monthlies, we broke daily morning activities down into backup checks. To do proactive checking, we started to implement a vast array of checks, and these have evolved. I mean, these aren't actually the current ones. I actually didn't have time to get the current ones, so I used the ones from a couple of years ago. But you can actually see it by Skype for Business, which is deprecated. But we would start to break it down and say from 7:30 to 8:30, this is what you do. You focus on these items. And after that, you can get to your business as usual. But check these items, make sure we know what's going on so that we can address any issues that may have occurred overnight. You can see it's actually quite extensive in terms of how we considered what we need to do. There's access control for our DR sites, checking our generators on an as and when basis. Well, I wouldn't say as and when basis, but when we hand over to standby. So this really formed the sort of, you can actually see, we talk about security a lot in the mornings. Because we couldn't observe security as a SOC all day, we had to do it as a point in time, then log it and move on for it. I'm well over my time, so I'm going to stop there and allow the vet to take any questions if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Gavin. I'm kind of, wow, this was extremely overwhelming. I'm not sure who shares my sentiment with that. So thank you for allowing us insight into your environment. Before we take questions, I just want to ask two of my own, maybe three. Gavin, I did send you my questions beforehand. How did you develop what you know? That is the first. How did you educate yourself? What's the skills base of your staff? And how do you develop the staff? And then lastly, I'd want an opinion on what do you think is the biggest failure of cybersecurity in local government?
Oh, that's a fun question. Thank you. That's a discussion topic of night. So I'll just start with the first one. How do I develop myself? I guess we're all unique in our own personalities. One of my superpowers, as one of my ex-staff, Gideon, often would discuss, is my superpower is just my relentlessness. And that's unique to me, and I try and instill it in my staff as best as possible. Relentless in enjoying my job. I thoroughly enjoy my job. So I'm relentless in my pursuit of knowledge. I'll give you a small example. One doesn't need to even attend formal training or tertiary training or have certifications or qualifications to really train yourself. What I would always do is if I implemented anything, I would always go through every, and this seems a bit, I'm going to use the word noddy because in my head it seems that way. I'd love to hear what this sounds like on the other side because I can hear what it sounds like in my head. But I would go over every button, every menu item in every single system I had, whether it's Unify, whether it's 40 Analyzer, whether it's EMS, whether it's SQL, whether it's PAM. I would familiarize myself with every single button and I would read every technical document that that service provider provided, Veeam included. So one of the things I would do, I'll go read their best practices. What are their best practices? What are Veeam's best practices? What are VMware's best practices? They generate amazing best practices. And I would just read all of their information and it enhanced my knowledge beyond anything I could get from training, in my opinion, because it was practical. It was things I had in front of me and it's things I could relate to and then I could implement in my daily life. So that's how I've done it. That and she's listening to a raft of I mean, I encourage my staff in a very different way than I've seen in a lot of environments. I encourage my staff, while you're working during the day, feel free to listen to a podcast. In fact, it forms part of their KPIs, ironically. They are compelled through KPIs to go attend seminars, listen to podcasts. And I do the same. I listen to things like Cyberwire, Darknet Diaries, Hacked, Hacker Daily, Hacker in the FBI. So often I'll sit, if I'm just answering emails within my workspace, I'll sit and listen to Darknet Diaries or Hacked or Hacker Daily or Network Chuck, and I encourage my staff to do the same. You can, I know they say sort of multitasking is not a real thing. I disagree. If I'm doing what I consider a menial task that I have capacity, I will listen to something in the background to reinforce knowledge I might still need or might have. And then I use a lot of free studies. So Fortinet offer free NSEs. You can go through all their study material and write the exams. I have not written the exams yet because at this point, the most important for me is to be able to manage the infrastructure. Skill sets in my office. I just use the same approach. I don't use an us and them approach. I encourage my staff to take the same approach I've taken, and I also take the same approach they take. So if they have something they do that I can learn from, I learn from it. I'm motivated for budget to train my staff, and those who saw my Salga presentation, I think I emphasized that too. We need to professionalize our staff and give them the opportunity and the confidence to do their job with confidence without worrying that they might not understand what they're doing or create issues within the environment. So the last one's quite a biggie. The biggest failure in local government is form of cybersecurity goes. I think the vet. I'm going to cite what we discussed before we started this, if you don't mind. I think one of the things I've discovered is I think almost all the managers in their own capacity and that are capacitated are capable. I think some of the things we probably struggle with is sharing of knowledge. And some might like this statement and not, and I'll surely put myself in the same categories. We are, as IT managers and security professionals and management professionals, we are quite fixed in our ways, and we often don't like asking for help because we are, maybe proud is the word that I would use. You know, if we don't want to call another IT manager and ask them to help, we sort of live within our silo, and we don't reach out to others enough, in my opinion. I know some might, and I don't want to cast everyone with the same brush, but I certainly will look back at myself over the years, and I've changed a lot over the years. And I will say in the early years, I really didn't like asking for help because I believed it said something about me. And I think as I've matured through the years, I've realized that, in fact, I need to offer help to show others that they can accept it. And I need to accept help to show others that it's acceptable to accept help where you might not have the knowledge. And again, that humility is something that I think we need to build into our daily lives. I've built it into the structure within my staff, where we allow one another to be right today, wrong tomorrow, right the next day. You know, nothing is absolute. Everything changes. So we can't be fixed in our ways. And I think that's the key, is constant improvement. Incrementally, it's essential. And I think that's probably the second failure. We're overwhelmed with governance and red tape, but you need to focus on the small things, the things we have and the things we can change. Governance alone is not going to change your posture. You're going to need to, as my first slide indicated, balance the actual practical security versus what governance can actually bring you. I'm not sure if that answers all your questions,
Gavin, thank you. If the audience don't mind, I'm going to overrun the time a bit. We're going to allow questions from the floor. Anybody that wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. I always smile when I see no hands coming forth. And, well, Gavin, it seems like you were so thorough that nobody has got questions. So
that's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for sharing and allowing us a in-depth view of what you do with cybersecurity. Gavin is reachable on LinkedIn. So Gavin Gresser, you can contact him via LinkedIn. His LinkedIn contacts is also on the invitation to the Coffee Clutch session. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending and participating. And I'm looking forward to hosting you later in April again. So thank you once again, Gavin. Last word before you go?
Last word will be, Devet, you're welcome to distribute my cell number. I'm a public servant, so I'm contactable on my cell phone anytime. Anyone's welcome to call me. I don't mind anytime, even after hours. I eat, sleep, and drink what I do. I love it. So please contact me anytime if you've got any questions. I'm happy to help in anything I can.
Can you type your cell number into the chat,
Sure.
please?
No problem. I'll do that. Please, anytime. No question is trivial. I love talking tech. If you give me any opportunity to talk about tech, I'll take it. Even governance, I love it equally.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you next month.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Gavin. Bye.